The clatter of tools against concrete halted as soon as the voice cut through the air like steel slicing silk. "What is this? A child in my garage during an inspection?" roared Gerald Whitmore, his polished Oxfords echoing against the floor of Unity Auto Works like a judge's gavel in a courtroom. The mechanics, seasoned, grease-stained, and tired, stiffened like students caught misbehaving. Standing near the front of a 2018 Camaro was a girl, 12 years old, her brown hand still wrapped around a socket wrench. Brielle Carter didn't flinch. She looked up, her curls pulled into a loose ponytail, her eyes steady beneath the fluorescent shop lights. She'd come straight from school as she did every day, trading textbooks for torque wrenches, drawn not by obligation but by something magnetic in the way engines breathed. Her father, Elijah Carter, stepped forward in a hurry, wiping his hands on a rag as though that would clean away the tension. "I'm sorry, Mr. Whitmore," he said, placing a hand on his daughter's shoulder. "Brielle, head home, sweetheart. This ain't the time." Whitmore lifted a hand, not to reassure, but to silence. He was a man used to being obeyed, owner of one of the largest repair shop chains across 3 states, a corporate predator in a tailored suit. "Let her stay," he said, a slow smirk curling at the edge of his mouth. "Actually, I've got a better idea." The room thickened with unease. Brielle stood up slowly, not because she was afraid, but because she'd seen that expression before, the one that flickered behind teachers' eyes when she raised her hand too confidently, or in grocery aisles when she lingered too long in the electronics section. It was the look of someone who had already decided who you were and what you couldn't possibly be. "So, Elijah," Whitmore continued, "your little genius seems pretty comfortable under the hood. Let's see if she's all that." He turned toward the back of the garage, where under a velvet tarp sat a Porsche Taycan 4S, one that had refused to start since the day it arrived 3 weeks ago. Not even the regional techs had been able to figure it out. "This car's been stumping the best minds in my entire network. Total loss if we can't get it started. How about we let your daughter take a shot?" The mechanics glanced at one another, expressions flickering between disbelief and discomfort. Elijah opened his mouth to object, but Whitmore waved him off. "Don't be so quick to panic," he said. "Let's make this fun. If she even diagnoses the issue, I'll not only keep this shop open, I'll give your entire crew a bonus." He paused for effect, then leaned in. "If she fails, though, well, let's just say your future gets a little uncertain." Brielle didn't wait for her father's response. "All right," she said, her voice calm and clear. Whitmore blinked, surprised. "Excuse me?" "I'll do it," Brielle repeated, walking slowly toward the Porsche. She wasn't afraid of challenges. She'd grown up in a world where expectations were always too low, where being excellent wasn't enough. You had to be undeniable. She circled the car once, letting her fingers glide across the chassis. She crouched and peered beneath the undercarriage, then opened the hood. Her movements weren't rushed or showy. They were deliberate. She moved like someone reading a language everyone else had forgotten how to speak. Whitmore chuckled. "This ought to be good." Elijah stood frozen, rage and fear mixing in his eyes. Tony Ramirez, the oldest mechanic in the shop, leaned close. "Elijah, we can't let this happen. She's a child." Elijah's reply was a whisper, hollow and helpless. "If I step in, he'll shut us down today." Brielle ignored them all. Her small hands hovered above the fuse box, then moved to the diagnostic port. She reached for the onboard system panel, her eyes narrowing. "Interesting," she murmured. "This isn't a hardware fault." "Speak up, genius," Whitmore called, We're dying for your wisdom." Brielle looked up, her expression steady. "The security module on this car is rejecting the ignition sequence. It thinks it's been tampered with." Tony furrowed his brow. "You mean, like anti-theft software?" Brielle nodded. "Exactly. But this one's coded with something custom. A digital signature mismatch. It's like it doesn't recognize its own components anymore." Jake Nguyen, one of the younger techs, stepped closer. "How do you even know this stuff?" "I study," Brielle said simply. "When Dad's not looking, I read the technical manuals. I've also been using an emulator to simulate diagnostics, and watching walkthroughs, and—" "You mean YouTube?" Whitmore snorted. "She's quoting YouTube like it's the damn Bible." "Better than pretending to know everything and breaking more things," she said quietly, almost too low to hear. Whitmore's jaw tightened. "You really think you can fix what certified technicians couldn't?" "I already know what's wrong," Brielle said, her eyes not leaving the engine. "I just need a computer with internet access to download the patch and reset the firmware." "Absolutely not," Whitmore barked. "You touch that firmware and the warranty's void. You blow it, you'll owe me $100,000. Tony stepped forward. "With respect, sir, you were going to declare it totaled anyway. What have you got to lose?" Whitmore glared at him but said nothing. Tony turned to Brielle. "Do what you need to do, kid." Brielle nodded, then pulled out a battered laptop from her backpack. Within seconds, she had connected it to the Porsche's diagnostic system. Code began to stream down the screen. She typed with the precision of someone who had practiced in secret for months. "Dad," she said, without looking up, "remember when I told you I was just curious about your shop logs? I wasn't just curious. I've been running comparisons. This isn't the first car with this issue. I've seen at least 12 come through Whitmore garages." A hush spread through the garage. Whitmore's expression shifted from amusement to confusion. "What are you talking about?" Brielle turned the screen. A spreadsheet displayed a list of VINs, failure dates, identical error codes. "This was deliberate," she said. "Someone at the manufacturer programmed a failure into the system to trigger after a specific time. And those cars? They were all flagged as irreparable, then quietly bought back at half price." Tony leaned in. That's fraud." "It's more than fraud," Brielle added. "It's systemic. And here's the part that matters to you." She opened a second tab, email transcripts, internal memos. "Mr. Whitmore here receives a commission on each vehicle declared unfixable." Whitmore's face turned pale. "You little hacker," he spat. "You broke into private systems." "I did," Brielle said, without apology. "And I saved every log. I even streamed this whole thing live. Almost 5,000 people are watching now." Whitmore staggered backward. "You'll never get away with this." "I already did," Brielle said, closing the laptop. "You shouldn't have tried to humiliate me. You should have been worried about what I could see." Elijah finally stepped forward, his hand on Brielle's shoulder, his voice hoarse. "You've been learning this whole time?" "I had to," she whispered. "No one else was going to." And outside, the first siren began to wail, but inside, something louder had already broken. A lie, a prejudice, and an industry's illusion of who mattered and who didn't. Brielle just stood there, not as a girl with a wrench, but as a force no one saw coming. 3 weeks later, the sign above the shop had changed. Where it once read Unity Auto Works in peel-in blue paint, it now glowed with fresh letters in polished silver. Carter and Daughter Advanced Diagnostics. The workshop was still cluttered with tools and smelled of motor oil and burnt rubber, but there was a new hum to it, a rhythm not of exhaustion, but of motion with purpose. Brielle sat cross-legged near the diagnostics bench, her fingers dancing across a tablet screen, refining a code that could detect recurring firmware sabotage in hybrid vehicles. She wore her school uniform under a grease-streaked hoodie, her hair pulled back with a pencil like a makeshift crown. Elijah watched her from the break room window, a coffee mug forgotten in his hand, pride and bewilderment chasing each other across his face. A month ago, he had tried to protect her from embarrassment. Now, the world had seen what he almost missed. Customers were calling from all over the county, not because of the cars, because of the girl. After the live stream that exposed Whitmore's fraud, Brielle's name had ricocheted across the internet like a spark in dry grass. News outlets came, journalists came, engineers from out of state came, but she didn't change. She still showed up at 7, still worked through lunch, still picked up after the mechanics because she hated leaving things undone. One afternoon, a man in a crisp gray suit stepped through the garage doors. He wore a watch that probably cost more than their monthly rent and shoes that had never touched engine grease. His name was Dr. Lennox Hale, and he introduced himself as the lead innovation strategist for a major electric vehicle startup in Seattle. "We've seen your broadcast," he told Brielle, offering her a business card made of black titanium. "We'd like you to present your sabotage detection model to our team." Brielle blinked. "I haven't finished it." "Good," Dr. Hale said. "That means it's still pure." She didn't smile, but something flickered in her eyes. "I'll have to talk to my dad," she said, and meant it. That night, she sat across from Elijah in their small kitchen, the dinner gone cold between them. "They want me to go to Seattle for a week," she said, staring into her glass of juice. "They said I can bring you." Elijah didn't speak at first. He rubbed his chin, the same way he did when figuring out why a drive shaft rattled under strain. "What do you want?" he asked finally. Brielle looked up. "I want to show them what we built." The next morning, they flew to Seattle. She presented to a room full of adults who had PhDs and patents and entire teams behind them. She didn't stumble once. She explained her code, the detection algorithm, the pattern recognition, the ethics of transparency. At the end of it, one woman leaned forward and said softly, "You're 12?" Brielle nodded. "Yes, but I've been paying attention for a while." And they offered her a $2 million consulting contract with a clause that let her continue school and control a portion of the design team remotely. Brielle accepted, but with one condition. "My father's shop becomes the pilot site," she said. "Tony, Jake, Carla, they helped me. They believed me when it wasn't safe to. We do this together or not at all." The executives hesitated, then nodded. That fall, the first training programs launched out of Carter and Daughter. They called it Project Clear Engine. Brielle taught 5 students older than she was. She printed out schematics and made them color code every component. "You don't get to pretend to know," she said. "You learn it, all of it." Word spread fast. A journalist from New York called her the mechanic prophet. Another dubbed her Detroit's daughter, even though she'd never set foot in Michigan. But Brielle kept her head down. She still swept the floor, still called Tony sir, still tested every line of code herself before she let anyone else touch it. Meanwhile, Gerald Whitmore's empire was crumbling. After federal agents raided his offices, they discovered forged compliance documents, fake service logs, and private emails detailing profit from deliberate sabotage. He lost his licenses, his company, his credibility, his lawyer. He was indicted on fraud and obstruction charges and sentenced to 18 months of house arrest in a cramped apartment with no view, no press, and too much time to think. One night, he watched a TV segment where Brielle accepted an award for youth leadership and innovation. She wore a navy blazer 2 sizes too big and mismatched shoes because she still hated dress clothes. The host asked, "What drives you?" Brielle looked into the camera and said, "I guess I just want people to stop assuming they already know who you are." Whitmore turned off the TV and stared at the blank screen. "She was just a kid," he muttered, but the truth was louder. She had never been just a kid. Back at the shop, Elijah stood at the threshold of the main garage bay and watched as Brielle explained torque sensors to a group of interns from the community college. One girl, about 15, looked at her with the kind of awe usually reserved for astronauts. "Dad," Brielle said later that evening, "do you ever wish I was more normal?" Elijah looked at her long and slow. "Brielle, normal can't save anyone. But what you've got, it can change things." She looked down at her shoes. "It already did, didn't it?" And he smiled, a quiet father's smile, and nodded. Outside, the sky over their city pulsed with stars, distant but real. And somewhere beneath that starlight, Brielle Carter, 12 years old, engineer, hacker, mechanic, truth-teller, was just getting started. The storm didn't come with thunder. It came with subpoenas, sealed warrants, and quiet whispers across boardrooms from Los Angeles to Detroit. 3 months after Brielle Carter exposed the localized fraud scheme at Whitmore's network of repair shops, federal investigators traced the software patterns to a manufacturing loophole buried inside the North American production arm of Harwick Motor Group. It turned out the glitch wasn't a glitch. It was design. Cars across multiple brands, including Harwick's luxury line, were embedded with dormant shutdown protocols triggered by mileage algorithms and geolocation. The purpose wasn't safety. It was sabotage. An entire resale division operated by shell corporations would reclaim the unrepairable cars, patch the code, and flip them overseas at profit margins triple their original worth. Brielle had only exposed the tip, but now they knew where to dig. And everyone wanted to talk to the girl who'd cracked the first engine. She sat in a high-rise meeting room in Washington, D.C., fidgeting in her hoodie while a group of federal cybersecurity analysts in buttoned shirts and tight collars reviewed her notes. A digital forensics specialist named Dr. Velez stared at her with a mixture of disbelief and awe. "You wrote this?" he asked, holding up a 12-page technical dissection of Harwick's embedded firmware sabotage. "I tested it last night," Brielle said softly. "It checks out." He shook his head. "You're 12. "Almost 13, she corrected. He didn't laugh. "I've worked this beat for 15 years, and we didn't even come close to this." Brielle shifted in her chair. "That's because you were looking for bad parts. I looked for patterns." Across the country, workshops began calling Carter and daughter, asking for training on how to spot digital fraud before wasting hours on fake diagnostics. Elijah installed a second lift. Jake hired 2 apprentices. Tony started referring to Brielle as boss without irony. The local news ran her story again. Then national news picked it up. And one morning, Brielle opened her inbox to see a message from the White House Science Advisory Board. The subject line read, "Youth Ethics Panel, Invitation to Speak." She didn't respond right away. Instead, she walked to the garage, climbed into the same Porsche she had once fixed under fire, and sat in the driver's seat. She didn't turn the key. She just sat there. Elijah found her that way 15 minutes later. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded. "I think I'm scared of being a symbol." He leaned against the hood. "You're not a symbol. You're a girl who did something most grown men wouldn't dare." "I'm not done," she whispered. "I don't think this is even the biggest part yet." He looked at her, and in his silence was the answer she already knew. The next week, she spoke before Congress. She wore her school skirt and a borrowed blazer 2 sizes too big. Her voice shook on the first line. It didn't shake again. "What I saw in that engine," she said, "wasn't a one-off failure. It was a system teaching itself to hide." Members of the Oversight Committee asked her questions about source code, ethical frameworks, vendor protocols. She answered every one. The transcript of her testimony went viral. But what followed wasn't applause. It was resistance. A week after her speech, the Carter and daughter garage was broken into. Nothing was stolen. But every computer was smashed, every tablet shattered. Even the bench where Brielle kept her notes was turned upside down, her papers scattered, burned at the edges like someone wanted her to know this wasn't about theft. It was a message. Elijah found her standing in the middle of the mess the next morning, her face unreadable. "You okay?" he asked, same as before. She nodded. "They're scared." He looked around at the wreckage. "Should we stop?" She picked up a piece of melted plastic from her old keyboard. "No," she said. "We go faster." Within days, Brielle rebuilt her system. Word spread. Donations came in, so did volunteers. A nonprofit called Truth Trackers offered backup servers. A group of MIT students asked to intern under her, remotely. A retired federal agent sent her encrypted logs that corroborated her theory. The software vulnerabilities were intentional, and someone high up had been protecting the pipeline for years. Meanwhile, a whistleblower inside Harwick surfaced. His name was Brandon Ellis, a quality control auditor who'd been fired after raising red flags. "You want proof?" he said over a secure Zoom call. "I've got emails, blueprints, payoffs, and a shipping manifest showing tampered firmware units rerouted through third-party vendors." Brielle listened. Then she asked, "Why now?" Brandon hesitated. "Because I saw your testimony, and because I realized I was waiting for someone else to take the first step. You did." A week later, federal agents raided Harwick's headquarters. They seized files, arrested 3 executives, and uncovered a network of shell companies funneling over $1.4 billion through offshore tax shelters. At the press conference, an agent mentioned a young consultant whose research provided the foundational insights for the case. He didn't say her name. He didn't have to. Everyone knew. At school, Brielle still sat alone at lunch, still brought PB&J and plastic wrap. But now students peeked over their shoulders to see if she was working on something. Teachers began calling her Miss Carter by accident. Some tried to be her friend. She was polite, but distant. She had work to do. Back home, the garage had become more than a repair shop. It was a lab, a classroom, a beacon. One afternoon, a woman with short dreadlocks and a NASA jacket stepped inside. She introduced herself as Dr. Simone Rhodes. "I lead the Artemis Engines Initiative," she said. "We'd like you to join our shadow team." Brielle blinked. "You want me to work on space shuttles?" "No," Dr. Rhodes said. "I want you to help design fault detection systems before they leave Earth. You've already proven you see things we miss." Elijah stood nearby, watching his daughter not as a little girl anymore, but as a force. "Can I think about it?" Brielle asked. "Of course," Dr. Rhodes replied. "Just don't think too long. The world doesn't wait for brilliance forever." That night, Brielle sat under the stars behind the shop, notebook open, sketching a new kind of alert system. One that wasn't just for cars, one that could track patterns in any system, from city buses to school funding algorithms. "I want to build something," she told her father quietly. "Something they can't erase, even if they try." Elijah sat beside her, folding his arms across his chest. "You already did," he said, "and you're still building it." She looked at him. "Dad?" "Yeah?" "Do you think I'll ever be normal again?" He shook his head. "I hope not." Somewhere in the distance an engine started. Not a broken one, not sabotaged, just running clean, the way it was meant to. The morning of the launch was quiet. Not quiet like stillness, but quiet like reverence. Like the world understood it was about to witness something rare and hadn't yet figured out how to breathe. At the Thompson and Daughter shop, Brielle stood on a step stool beside a table lined with prototype boards, wires, and diagnostic chips. She wasn't in her hoodie this time. Today, she wore a navy jacket with the stitched emblem of her new research cohort, Artemis Insight Team, a joint venture between NASA and MIT. She hadn't moved to Boston like they wanted. Instead, they'd moved toward her. Every week, they streamed data to her garage lab. Every week, she sent back corrections that saved them thousands of hours. But today wasn't about satellites or engines. Today was about Brielle's bigger project, the one no one in Washington had asked her to build, but which now had the eyes of half the country. Project Keen, Kinetic Electronic Ethics Network, a system designed to identify algorithmic bias and digital suppression patterns before they harm vulnerable populations. It was a new kind of watchdog, one that didn't bark after damage was done, but saw the shift in temperature long before the fire broke. Her idea had started from a single spreadsheet back when she was 12, cross-referencing repeat car breakdowns and VIN numbers. But now, Keen was being piloted in 5 states, with Brielle as its lead architect at age 13. Reporters called her the Spark. The name stuck. She didn't like it much. Sparks fade. She didn't plan to. At noon, Elijah wheeled out the banner they'd hidden behind the tarp. Community Tech Collective. Open house today. Below it, Brielle's name wasn't in bold. It wasn't even listed alone. It appeared in lowercase beside every apprentice, every mechanic, every student who had contributed. The idea had never been about credit. It had been about scale. That afternoon, girls from the local middle school arrived carrying notebooks, wearing curiosity on their sleeves. Some had never stepped inside a workshop before. Brielle greeted each one with the same question. What do you want to know that no one thinks you can? That was the real curriculum. The truth wasn't in machines. It was in the permission to ask. Meanwhile, across town, the sentencing for Whitmore was underway. He had pleaded guilty to 6 counts of conspiracy, fraud, and data suppression. The courtroom was packed. But it wasn't the media who made it matter. It was the row of mechanics sitting in the back, arms crossed, wearing Carter and Daughter sweatshirts. When the judge announced a 7-year sentence and a lifetime ban from operating any registered repair shop, someone near the door clapped once. That was all it took. Whitmore didn't speak. He stared at the floor. His arrogance didn't just vanish. It eroded, like rust shaken loose by truth. Brielle didn't attend the hearing. She didn't need to. Justice, she had learned, wasn't something you chased for closure. It was something you made so solid no one could deny it anymore. That evening, as the garage lights dimmed and the last batch of students filed out, she stayed behind to organize her bench. She found an old diagram from her first Porsche hack, smeared with oil and margin notes. She smiled, not because of nostalgia, but because she still remembered how afraid she'd been. "You ready?" Elijah called from the doorway, keys jangling. "Almost," she replied. She ran her fingers across the tools, across the chipped table, across the edges of the future she had carved out of defiance. Outside, the community garden buzzed with late summer energy. A mural had gone up the week before. It was painted across the far wall of the workshop. A girl with braids stood on a stack of car manuals reaching toward a glowing circuit in the sky. The text below her feet read, "Look again." It wasn't credited, but everyone knew. The mayor had declared September 14th Brielle Carter Day. The city council passed a resolution to fund tech education grants in her name. Companies that once rejected resumes from her zip code now asked to sponsor interns from the workshop. But it was a letter she received that morning, scrawled in blue ink and written on a folded napkin, that meant the most. It came from a girl named Charlie, aged 10, who had watched Brielle's story on her aunt's cracked phone. The letter read, "Dear Brielle, I thought maybe I was dumb because I like numbers more than people and I don't talk a lot. Then I saw you and you made it okay. Please don't stop being different." Brielle had folded the letter and tucked it into her jacket pocket where it stayed like armor. After dinner, Elijah found her back in the garage. Not working, just sitting. "Something wrong?" he asked. She shook her head. "Not wrong, just big." He nodded, waited. "What if this gets too big for me?" she asked. He walked over, pulled a stool beside her. "Then it means it's finally the right size for the world." She looked at him, her eyes full of both wonder and doubt. "I'm not done, Dad." "I hope you never are." They sat like that, side by side, while a breeze pushed open the shop's front door. It carried the sound of traffic, of children, of life moving forward. The future had already started. But tomorrow, it would have Brielle's fingerprints all over it. 3 months later, KEEN was adopted as the early detection framework for over 20 state-funded programs. A high school in Minnesota used it to identify discriminatory grading algorithms. A hospital in Atlanta used it to flag a scheduling system that deprioritized patients without private insurance. And in every press release, Brielle's name appeared not as the star, but as system initiator. It was the role she'd chosen. The spark was theirs now. One spring morning, Brielle received an envelope in the mail. Inside was a certificate with an embossed seal. MIT Class of 2032. Early admission with full honors. She didn't jump. She didn't cry. She folded it carefully and pinned it to the same wall where her first wrench once hung. She was already building what came after. That summer, Elijah turned the keys of the garage over to the new team. Jake, now a certified systems analyst, ran operations. Tony taught apprentices. A second building opened behind the original shop, Thompson Tech Academy. Free enrollment, paid internships, no age requirements, just questions, always questions. Brielle stood at the ribbon-cutting ceremony, not behind the podium, but among the students. She wore her signature jacket and a pin shaped like a circuit coil. One reporter asked her what she would tell kids who didn't think they were smart enough. She said, "You're not supposed to know everything. You're supposed to notice what others miss." In the back, a girl held a sign that read, We don't need permission to matter." Brielle smiled. That was it. That was the headline. That evening, as she stood beneath the mural outside the shop, she closed her eyes and whispered the words her mother once told her when she was 6 and tried to fix a broken toaster. "If it doesn't work the way they say it should, maybe you were meant to change the instructions." The wind answered, not with words, but with stillness, with clarity, with the knowing that the impossible wasn't a wall. It was a door, waiting for someone like her to pry it open. And that someone, once called just the mechanic's daughter, had become the blueprint for a world that finally remembered how to listen when young black girls speak.